Welcome to Bold, Series 3 of Cook with an Architect. I'm your host, Chandy Reed, and in this year's series, we're focusing on homelessness within the UK. Here on the show, we aim to highlight one of the 5 senses in architecture, taste, a sense that is often not considered in the design process. However, today on the show, we will explore architecture through food by getting our guest architect to create a dish that answers this question: what does architecture mean to you? In today's episode, our guest is James Furzer, an international multi-award winning architect who has work receiving accreditation throughout Europe, America and Asia. His success has been seen in TED Talks to over 1,200 visitors, as well as securing residence talks, Grand Designs Live, the Ideal Home Show, also featured several times in ITV News, London Live News and BBC radio stations. James pushes an agenda for accessible architecture to allow all social classes the ability to enjoy and experience beautiful design spaces. James' award-winning designs range from temporary homeless shelters through to bespoke London drinking fountains. With further ado, please help me to welcome James Furzer. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. We are going to make a dish which is based off the question of what does architecture mean to you. So just before I start asking you why did you become an architect, why you chose to come into this industry, please let the audience know what your ingredients are.
Do you want to know the dish or is that a surprise? Am I just doing the ingredients?
Let's do the ingredients.
Let's do the ingredients first. Okay, so.
Actually, no, let's tell them the dish.
Tell them the dish.
So what dish will you be making for us today?
So today we're going to be making some tomato soup, which doesn't sound very bougie, but actually there's a reason behind that and justification as to why I've gone with something very simple. And it relates very nicely to the topic of conversation, which is homelessness.
Perfect.
So with that, I've brought along some tomatoes.
Okay.
Fresh tomatoes. We have some sun-dried tomatoes here.
Yeah.
We have some butter, garlic, salt, pepper and sugar. And some mozzarella, along with some basil, some cream and some sourdough.
Wow, amazing. I'm actually really excited to taste this, to see what it's going to be, how it's going to taste like. So also I wanted to ask, as you know, the theme of the show is homelessness, and the question that this dish is going to answer is, what does architecture mean to you? So why did you choose this particular dish for today's episode?
So this dish, I was scouring the internet for potential solutions and options here, and there was all sorts of extravagant dishes that I was considering, but actually I thought, well, let's scale this back. So what is my driver in architecture, which is to make accessible, beautifully designed space for everybody, inclusive architecture essentially. So then I thought, okay, if I'm stripping down architecture in that form, what's a very basic dish? Tomato soup. It sounds really bold, really plain, really boring, but actually when we lay that onto the homelessness side of things and the topic of conversation in that respect, we're looking at soup runs and things like that for the homeless. It's one of the common dishes that are handed out because it's easily accessible. All these ingredients don't cost too much, very minimal in terms of outlay.
And as well, you can do, if someone don't have access to like the fresh tomatoes, they can use canned tomatoes as well.
Exactly that. So you can use tinned soups, tinned ingredients as well. It's just a very easy, accessible dish that hopefully complements the conversation that we're having today, rather than overpowers with times and burning ingredients and smokes, all that kind of thing, and the chaos in the kitchen so that Gordon Ramsay doesn't storm in through the door. So it's just something that complements the conversation, which is tomato soup.
Yeah, which I think goes well, and especially with the sense that we have for the show, which is taste. So it goes well with understanding of like, what does architecture mean to you? When you think of homelessness, you think of a meal that is more hearty, more warm, that kind of like, comforting, which people...
Exactly that, right? So when you think of sort of a hearty, warm meal, you're looking at roast dinners, you're looking at pies, you're looking at something very homemade. And soup is that. I mean, when you're feeling unwell, what do you tend to lean for? It's a soup of some sort. And it's about the necessity of food and taste and flavour, which again ties in really nicely with this conversation of what do the homeless individuals and the homeless community need. And that is bare necessities of protection, shelter, warmth, and a little bit of comfort and food. So it's about actually implying a dish that relates nicely to the simplicity of what the homeless individuals require.
So before I start asking you more questions, what do you want us to start doing to start cooking your dish?
As you've kindly offered, I mean, the first thing, let's start chopping up some ingredients, right? So we need to start looking at cutting our garlic up and cutting some of our tomatoes. So we're going to be looking at, and please forgive me, I am not any Jamie Oliver or Gordon Ramsay.
It's okay, don't
I am
worry.
a mere architect.
Yes.
However, it's going to be a mixture of roasting some of the tomatoes, and we're going to be frying some of the tomatoes in the pan, and then we're going to eventually blitz all that up in the ingredients. And as I say, although it's a simple dish, we have tried to give it a little bit more oomph,
Yeah.
so it does become a little bit more exciting on your tastes and your palate. So yeah, if we can start by chopping some tomatoes and garlic. Are these our knives here?
Yeah, these are nice.
Right. Okay. So we've got
one for you.
we'll go for you first. So we'll be a gentleman. So, right, so we need 1 kilogram of tomatoes from memory.
Okay.
And I hope you're going to put the recipe up online for
Yes,
the
we are.
viewers.
Everyone's going to have the recipe, so you can also cook the recipe at home. So the link to the recipe will be in the description box, which will link to our website, and also cook along with us as well, so you'll be a part of the conversation.
Perfect. Yeah. Right, okay. So should we mix a few tomatoes? We've washed our hands beforehand. We'll have a couple of tomatoes. I think 1 kilogram is probably, I'd say 4 each.
4? Okay.
Yeah, 4 each is about 1 kilogram, I would imagine.
5. Because once it cooks down, it kind of like...
Well, we'll go 5. Whose recipe is this today?
Oh, sorry, it's yours.
So we'll go 5. So
how do you want to cut?
If we just quarter those for the time being, because these ones we can fry in the oven.
Okay.
So the idea is that we'll just fry these and let these do their thing. So if we just do half and half of quarters.
I wanted to ask you a question, and as we're looking at taste for this year's series, we just want to understand, like, how can we use taste in a way to design spaces to help others with their well-being? Because a lot of times spaces, when I was looking at one of your talks, and you were saying that how when you spoke to the homeless people, or say rough sleepers, one thing they always said that they don't want to be in the eyes of those who are always, the eyes of the public, always staring at them. And one thing I always say in all my episodes is that, like, as architects, we are the doctors of the built environment. So we're able to heal and help with the well-being of other people. But I just wanted to know, like, how can we use our skills and understanding of maybe one of the sense of taste, materials and all the visual senses to kind of design spaces that are healing for our vulnerable community?
Well, what's really interesting with that is actually, so I've always said architecture is a very, very powerful tool. Yeah. So as architects, we have the ability to dictate how people live their lives, and that will be how they experience space, whether it be an extension for a project or a new development. We have the ability to control how they navigate that environment. So when we're looking at sort of senses, comfort, we're talking about things such as, how does a space make you feel? So does that include bringing natural light in? Does that include biophilic design? So where we're talking about bringing the outside in and greenery and open spaces, that kind of thing. So there's so many tools that we can have that play with senses and how a space makes you feel emotionally. Yeah. It can dictate not just how we navigate, but how we feel. So does it make us feel excited? Does it make us feel sad? Does it make us feel relaxed? And I think there was a thing, sort of a theme a little while ago, where I say a few years back, where I started to notice a lot of hostile architecture. Yeah. And architecture designed in a fashion to exclude certain social classes. And as I said in some of the talks previously, the necessities or what the fundamentals that a homeless community require are a lot different to what most social classes experience or want and need. And that is shelter, that's comfort, that's warmth. It's protection from the gaze of those who look down on those, and that is a common thing with those sleeping rough. Yeah. They do feel like outcasts of the community, and a lot of that then stems from the environments that are created around them. So we have the hostile architecture of spikes in doorways that we've seen around flats to deter people from particular areas. Window sills, down to bus stops with slope benches. And park benches with armrests that are there to encourage people not to sleep. whilst they're hidden behind a facade of functionality, these components. So that will be an armrest is there to help the elderly step up or sit up from that bench. When actually it has a more underlying aggressive tone, which is to stop those being able to sleep comfortably of an evening in those areas. So we start to see little tools that are designed in a way to push people out of our
cities,
our communities.
And is like seeing the kind of like cruelty, I guess, towards vulnerable communities and rough sleepers, is that one of the reasons why you decided to become an architect? Does that kind of stem the reason, that compassion, that desire in you to want to actually to pursue architecture and actually maybe let me try to help this community?
It wasn't a driver in my desire to become an architect. So this is always a job or a role that I've always seen myself doing, even from a young age. So whether that be the creative side of things, building, drawing, that kind of thing, the crafty side of me. However, so my sister, as I got older, my sister developed some conditions in her eyes, which ultimately led for her to become blind.
Okay.
And what I did notice, so the thing that highlighted this hostile architecture, or how we navigate our environment, was my sister's condition.
Okay.
So I began to look at how she navigates her home, which is an environment that she's extremely familiar with, and how difficult it became because of her eyesight and how that was deteriorating. So I started to notice in the streets, we'd be walking along and she'd trip and she'd walk into things, and then I started to look at how can we design more inclusively, which initially was for those with disabilities, but as I explored that topic, it highlighted things to me that I hadn't seen before, which was this hostile architecture movement. And I say movement because it was a few years back, it was a very, very prevalent thing.
Well, wouldn't you say it still is quite...
It still is, yeah. So you still see this...
Even bus stops, like you were saying, the seats, like even the new bus stops that's been developed, there's still seats that kind of slope and they're like at different levels or like...
Exactly that, yeah. So and again, it's designed in a way that you can only perch there. So it's not necessarily with the wording to stop a homeless individual staying or sleeping there, but it's designed so you can perch. It's not designed so you can sit comfortably for prolonged periods of time. And that is a design driver. The Camden bench is something very similar in terms of, I don't know if you've come across the Camden bench.
Yeah, I've seen pictures.
Which is the bench that's designed with however many ways of sitting and perching on there, but designed in a way that homeless individuals can't stay there, skateboarders can't use it for grinding that sort of enjoyment. So, and that was one of the design drivers. It had to be a bench, effectively, that wasn't particularly comfortable, which I find a very interesting topic of conversation when we are designing environments to be comfortable.
Yeah. So just before I ask the next question, what do you want us to do with this one?
So if we can fry your selection.
Fry my selection?
Yeah, we'll fry yours and then we will oven cook mine, if that's okay with you.
Do you need...
Perfect. I'm going to put a little bit of foil. Yeah, I'm going to put some foil down and I'm going to put some olive oil. In fact, we need to do the garlic as well. So if you could just foil that tray for me.
Okay.
I will work on some garlic.
So as you were saying, in terms of hostile architecture, and you said that it stemmed from the idea of like your sister, you started to see all these things starting to play out, and you came up with like the initiative to start designing projects that kind of help the homeless. So what are some of those projects that you actually designed that kind of help towards improving the lives of those who are homeless?
So this is actually a really interesting topic. I initially designed some concepts with the intention, if you could do some as well, that'd be great, with the intention that I wanted to create some controversy. I didn't want, this was fairly early on in my career as an architect. And what I wanted to do was, I knew instantly that there was a bigger issue to the homeless crisis.
Yeah.
So I knew that a temporary shelter of sorts. So I knew that just creating some kind of shelter wasn't going to be sufficient to the homeless crisis. So my intention was to always create something of controversy, something to make the topic relevant and current. So you'll see that my concepts, so the homeless hut and the shelters, they're a little bit out there in terms of viability.
Yeah.
And that was a deliberate tactic. That was to create that conversation.
Yeah.
And stir up a little bit of, I guess, fear mongering is probably the right word. So, I was fortunate enough to present these at Grand Designs on their stages, on their live talks, and it was really interesting to actually get real-time reactions from the general public and feedback and comments. And also when these projects went live and won the awards that they did, just to see how the public reacted online was very interesting and quite concerning in some respects, some of the comments and feedback that was given. Yeah. So it's all about creating conversation, creating controversy, and each scheme slowly developed that conversation.
So just like you were saying in terms of how the reactions of the people, and I wanted to ask, do you think people are scared to step out of their norms, like their bubble of when it comes to architecture? Because you stated in your TED talk that societal norms need to be challenged and removing the barriers of normality. And I think since we had the movement of modernism in architecture, I feel like we've been stuck in that era and no one has really challenged or tried to develop, you can say if I'm wrong or not, try to develop something that's new, if that makes sense. So our cities tend to just be very flat, like you were saying, hostile kind of like architecture. There's not much interest like that kind of engages you when you walk throughout the city. That kind of looks at our well-being, because like you were saying that your sister, she lost her sight.
Correct.
But it made you realize that we need all our senses when designing spaces.
Or we design to facilitate those without senses. So whether that be adaptive, and this relates to our homes as well, right? So a lot of my projects are residential schemes and things like that. And how do you relate that accessibility to your home, and how do you adapt that existing structure and building? So I don't think it's so much that people aren't pushing the boundaries now, because they can be seen, and that's where some of these new environments that are being created are really stunning. But I think when pushing societal norms, I think it's more a case of how the general public, myself included, view the homeless community. So it's about, do you see
their views.
Exactly, changing their, understanding. Everyone's guilty of this. You walk past a homeless individual and it makes you feel uncomfortable, so you look away. And I myself, when I was younger, used to do it. It's hard to break that feeling, because it does make you feel uncomfortable. And whether that's because you're embarrassed, whether that's because you feel that you're going to ask for money, or whatever it might be, it's that societal understanding of a homeless individual and how that makes you feel. So that's what I think needs to change first and foremost.
The mindset
of the general public. And so when I say the general public, those that aren't homeless, effectively. It's a very taboo subject.
Yeah.
And often, as an architect, is how I earn my living, is people pay me to design beautifully designed, considered space. And I think, actually, everybody deserves that enjoyment of that space, and to have that sort of space accessible to those. Yeah. And that includes those sleeping rough. Now, I'm not saying that architecture can solve
all the problems,
the issue of homelessness or the crisis. However, it can certainly make the environment more comfortable. Yeah,
and that's what I was trying to say, that even like when you walk through certain cities where they have like beautiful architecture, they have the cathedrals and stuff, it doesn't give off a presence like, oh, no one's welcome here, but it gives off a presence that everyone's welcome to come and look, to kind of come and see. And I think like designing spaces that are not so, like you saying, hostile, but now you have like buildings that are very much glass, like commercial cities, like very glass, very tall, plain walls. Some of the areas are kind of like facing where you have the air vents and all that kind of stuff. But if we design cities that are more welcoming, that like your design, would you say that is a more of a parasitic kind of design, where it attaches itself to the...
So my scheme focused purely on parasitic schemes and concepts. The reason for that is I wanted to show... First of all, I wanted people to sit there and think, oh my God, this could be attached to my house, et cetera, et cetera. But there was also a level of sustainability and how do we reuse a building's waste material.
Yeah.
So it'll be excess heat, that kind of thing. So, you know, it's a really interesting topic of conversation when you start to look at how...
Do you want to put olive oil on that?
Oh yeah, good point. Thank you for that. See, I'm getting distracted with the architectural talk.
Okay.
I've got to put some flavours and all sorts onto this. So
some salt as well.
Salt and pepper. But so actually, yeah, it become, you know, how do we create a shelter here that doesn't cost anything to run or to use, and actually, I'm breaking the machines again.
It's okay.
And actually, you know, create an environment that's comfortable for people to enjoy and live in. Yeah. So that was the main driver behind it becoming almost a parasitic building of structure of some sort. And actually, there's a really nice relationship there between the term parasitic.
Yeah.
You know, something that sponges, something that lives off of.
But sometimes parasitic can have a negative.
Exactly, and that was the whole point. That was the negative connotation to that was deliberate. So it was there to play on this negative emotion that people have against the homeless.
Yeah.
So also we don't feel comfortable with the homeless. Now they're parasites in our building. So there's actually a play on words for that whole concept. So that was the reasoning for that. It wasn't just a case of I want to bolt something on there. There was several. It needed to be contentious. It needed to be play on this parasitic host kind of thing. And actually, if you look at the concepts, they're raised. All of the concepts that I've done have been raised above the floor, except for the beach hut.
I did notice that, and I wanted to ask, why did you raise them so high up?
So it was working on the basis of raising them above
society.
So giving them a presence of finally feeling worth more than those who look down on them. So again, this connotation of social structure was really important. And so, the likelihood of someone bolting a homeless shelter onto the side of a building, it's almost never going to happen, right?
But it could happen.
It could happen, and that's what the concept's there for. But it was about instantly people like, oh my God, this can't be the solution. There must be other solutions, etc. Yeah. So it worked really well in that respect. Just creating that controversial conversation, that topic, and making it relevant.
Yeah, and do you think as well, in terms of, like you were saying, that our city's kind of hostile architecture is kind of like pushing those who are homeless away outside of the city? Do you think that our cities don't really foster the idea of community bonding? Because like you were saying, the benches are just for perching. And a lot of times when you look at the benches, people are faced away from each other. So people are not sitting to be able to look and maybe to have a conversation with someone next to them, or for like residential areas, or to have areas where people can congregate and actually have community and speak.
Social inclusion. And I think it's not saying that every bench suddenly has to be a bed.
Yeah.
Right. That's not the scenario. But it's very much a case of who do we want and who do we not want here. And I think that is not a connotation that we need to attach to our cities. I think it needs to be an environment. So how we design can change. Can affect mental health.
Yes,
if you've got these places of well-being, these open green spaces that are inclusive to everybody, that changes how, how people, not as I said before, navigate, but also feel, which affects mental health, which affects our general health, right? So this interaction between internal and external spaces. If you're, even in your public parks, if you're being ushered out of sight, not being helped in any way, ushered to a different town, shooing this problem along, which is effectively what has been happening for the last few years. It's only in recent years that there's charities now, Foundation 200, etc., that provide Foundation 200, I believe it is, that provide micro homes for those sleeping rough.
But it should be more possible, because since a lot of buildings last up to 40 years, like tall buildings, 40 years or 60 years. I feel like if we were able to reuse materials and actually build spaces which are probably temporary, for those who are sleeping rough, who are homeless, or even facilities for them to have the dignity of just to shower. The decency of being able to shower, or just to get water, or just the normal things you need for every single day. I think those are things that as architects we could really think about.
It's a very layered, I've broken apart, it's a very layered issue. It's not just a case of putting somebody into a home and that solved their homeless, the reason why they was homeless.
Yeah.
You know, there's layers to how they become homeless, why they become homeless. And in many cases, when I've spoken to homeless individuals, some enjoy that freedom. Some don't want to be housed again because, you know, the stress of a bill coming through is too much for them to handle, right?
Yeah.
So they actually like that freedom of being able to travel and move. But what would be beneficial is somewhere where they can get some sleep, they can wash, they can get out of the public gaze, they can just have that privacy. And I think that's it's an important fact. You can't just house everybody who's sleeping rough. It's not going to be the answer to it. It's not as simple as that. It's much more in depth. There's political issues, there's mental health issues, there's all sorts of financial issues. It's a whole sort of issue.
So
it's a huge issue, and that's why architecture just can't be the solution, but maybe it can be a catalyst, a stepping stone to some kind of normality, some kind of security. And there's so many sites that are being developed that aren't in use for several years. So maybe those dead spaces become temporary solutions with shelters that can be moved and demountable, and and they can travel from plot to plot. Who knows? But that's kind of where this topic of conversation is really interesting and gets really exciting. Perhaps that could be, maybe the councils can use brownfield or dead spaces.
Which, like you were saying, dead spaces, but it could also just be like an area where they can just, shower just to, just to brush their teeth or wash their face. And like you say, not everybody wants to be housed. So that means it's more of setting up a system that kind of like facilitates those who don't want to feel like tied down to one space. They just like to move or travel around. And I think I was looking at, there was this charity, I believe it was like just outside London, where it was like a bus and they were able to...
Should we fry those? Yeah, we can get those in there now.
Oh, I get some of these. It was just like a... which ones do you want? This one?
That one's fine, yeah.
Or this one?
No, this one's fine.
Okay.
I mean, I went straight in with the hands and threw it into the baking tray earlier.
So it's like a bus, and what they did is that they go around, and in the bus it has like a washing machine, it has a facility for them to get tea and coffee, and also like those who are volunteers to actually speak to the people and engage the community of the people. And they also help giving them opportunities to get off the ones who want to get off the streets, can get off the streets, get a job, get a place to stay. And I think that's something, I feel like, when you look at the actual type of architect, we're actually craftsmen, and it's actually us to actually design things, systems, problem solve. So it's more than just, like you were saying, more than just the building, but it's facilitating spaces or systems that kind of help those who are going through issues that are
Exactly that. So there's a whole host of issues and layers to the issue, to the homelessness crisis.
Yeah.
And we can provide tools for certain stages of that rehabilitation, for want of a better word. And I think that's what's really important. I mean, I've seen systems where buses have been converted to dental care for homeless individuals, so they can get their free dental care. And I just think that there's opportunity for architects to design spaces that are totally inclusive, that will help how an individual feels and experiences their day-to-day living.
Yeah.
And it might just be shelters. It might be places of public showering and toilets and that kind of thing. It could be open green spaces that aren't private. It could be a whole host of things. And I just think there's a necessity and a need for that in our environments. And we are seeing more of that. So it's not to say that architecture isn't doing that, because it is. And a lot of my projects focus on micro homes and micro shelters.
Could you explain some of the micro shelters, like a little bit more detailed? Because I know you explained first the homeless pods that went onto the buildings and how it was kind of a way of getting heat and water from the actual host that it's on. So could you explain a little bit more about what you do in the micro homes and the process of it, and how you're getting the materials and that kind of stuff?
So the idea, when we look at the homeless pods that were raised above the paths and sidewalks, is very American, but streets and things like that, it was what are the necessities?
Yeah.
Shelter, warmth, comfort.
Yeah.
We wasn't looking for a 5-star hotel. We was
Yeah.
looking for a space where someone could feel secure, which was raising above the general public, which layers that with the feeling of being socially higher.
Oh, sorry.
It was also, no, we're all right for times. We're all right for times. It was also the, the necessities. So we're talking about a comfortable bed, but we aren't talking about showers, toilets, etc. These were just purely somewhere secure for them to sleep.
Yeah.
And perhaps this is where the concept was interesting, because it wasn't considered in terms of functionality and how they're going to be monitored and how they're going to be maintained. It was purely, this is the concept, and this is what needs to be happening. We need to consider our homeless community. So, perhaps there is a charity that comes along and cleans them and months, and perhaps there is a system in which allows people to stay here as a reward if they are on drinking drugs, if they are looking for work, if they are doing certain things in the community, then actually this is a reward for them. They get to sleep here and they get to do that.
Yeah.
Who knows? And this is what's really interesting about these concepts. Another concept of mine was the beach hut.
Yeah,
now,
I've seen that one.
Beach huts are prime real estate.
Yeah.
Go upwards of £15,000 to 20, 30, 40,000 pounds for a shed on the beach.
Yeah, that's why I find it so crazy.
So could you imagine if this prime real estate actually become a promenade of homeless community, which I think is a really exciting
that would be nice
concept,
like a whole town basically. Or...
And yeah, exactly. And they were designed in a way that not only did they look beautiful, they resembled a hut. And it is when the design element it wasn't crazy. It wasn't out there. It's a form that everyone was recognisable with. So one of the issues that I had with the pods is everyone was like, it looks ugly, it's on the other side of the building. So actually I thought, what's something a bit more recognisable in terms of form, the beach hut, the shape, the size, the scale. And the concept was that these are lit up like beacons along the seafront. Nice. So they're all lit up and you've got this beautiful promenade for the homeless.
So they're also nice to look at.
Exactly, but they also, with that, they provide security, not only with private shelter, but with the lighting. So you're not in dark alleyways, you're not in dark areas. They've got this really lovely environment that they're enjoying. So it played on many different aspects and moments, which is what all the concepts have done. This one wasn't talking about raising them up, but it was talking about just the prime real estate, effectively. And I just think that's interesting. And again, it's all about this controversial topic of conversation, so bringing it back to the forefront, because what happens was it goes quiet and people kind of forget about the issue and then something else will crop up. So it's making sure that actually there's constant conversation and drive for this subject. Yeah. And that's kind of where the concepts all slowly grew and developed from that respect, which again was really interesting. It's always been good fun to do.
I think it's quite nice, like you were saying, it kind of like lit up across like the waterfront, which is quite nice. Where would the locations be? Across anywhere in the UK?
Anywhere on the seafronts. Yeah, anywhere on the seafronts. I mean, there was concepts where we would put them in parks, or we can raise them above, above, and played with foundation and structure and that kind of thing. So there was the application can be varied, but the initial. I mean, can you show images on the screen, or is that so? We'll get some images up of some of the concepts, just so that you can, the viewers can kind of understand what we're referring to, because they create a really lovely street scene along the beachfront, seafront, which is not only for the homeless people to use and enjoy, but it'd be for general public. Yeah, because when they're passing it, they'll still be able to enjoy it. Exactly, and then what happens is you kind of got this natural relationship of inclusivity in two different communities and social classes, right? So you're walking and you're enjoying this really lovely promenade, which is actually sheltering the homeless. So actually there becomes this really nice relatability there, which I think is really cool as well, because it is about this mentality and this change of emotion and perspective that people have on those. I'm just kind of pushing these around to look like I know what I'm doing. Is that right while this cooks? Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, just a really interesting topic. Salt on it, maybe to kind of help. Would you like to do the honours of the salt? Yeah, don't mind. Bit of pepper as well. Just put a little bit so it's not too salty. Okay. But I really love the concept. One thing when looking at your designs, one thing I said to myself is that your designs are very beautifully and humble.
they're very much like humble designs. They're not like trying to do too much. They're not trying to be over the top, but they just use humble materials. It's just like a nice, simple concept, and it kind of gets the point in terms of function and getting done what it needs to get done.
Exactly. So ultimately, people can design micro shelters.
But how could, if someone wanted to be involved in what you're doing, and say you want to make it more scalable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a possibility for people to volunteer? So maybe if they wanted to do the system that you're doing, could they set up a system to do it in their town?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, but ultimately, what they need, it needs to become much more considered when you're talking about making these totally viable. So then you are looking at infrastructure, you are looking at costs. So the idea about my projects were, I never worried about any of that stuff. I worried about the topic of conversation. As I keep kind of reiterating, it wasn't about viability.
It was just a topic.
It was a need to make this current.
Yeah.
And this year I'm doing, with some good friends of mine, we're doing another homeless project for Grand Designs in the Excel next year. Yeah. So look out for that, because that'll be a really interesting concept. But ultimately, I mean, if you wanted to house people, you could find an empty field and you could put caravans in there, static homes, toilets, whatever it might be. They serve a purpose. Mm-hmm. So when we're looking at this micro home kind of scenario, there is basic solutions. So it's about being playful as well as being controversial. And it kind of stemmed from my days of university, where we was a bit more creative and able to be a bit more free with our designs and our briefs and things like that.
That's one of the reasons why with Cooking with an Architect is kind of to bring that playful side back into architecture. Because I noticed that when you're studying architecture, you're more able to be playful, you're more able to be creative and actually use think and dream big. But I think sometimes as architects, you kind of like lose that ability to dream, if that makes sense. Because now you're restricted with planning permissions and restrictions on site, and you can't put this in that area or put that in, you know what I mean? And I think as architects, you kind of lose that excitement that you first get when you first studied architecture.
Exactly. I mean, and there is, as I said, there's charities out there that are doing great jobs of implementing homeless shelters. Real life products and projects that meet all these planning guidelines, that meet all this infrastructure. But it just goes under the radar, in my opinion. Unless you're kind of heavily invested in a topic like myself, where you're keeping on track of things. It's not readily known that these charities exist, where there are temporary shelters or permanent shelters now that are creating homeless communities. Which are donated to local authorities, which go onto sort of dead sites. Hence why my position and stance was about, they're doing what they need to do, which is housing these individuals. Let's keep that topic of conversation going. Let's make it relevant still, and let's be controversial. Let's be playful. Let's have a little bit of fun in terms of design side of things. And that's kind of where I position myself in the
spectrum of it.
Exactly right. So, I say there is ways to do that, and one of my big drivers was about changing the mental shift of general public, myself included.
So does it mean that we have a book coming out soon, or
It
sounds like it sounds like a book needs to be written about how architects can change their mindsets.
I mean, I'd certainly be up for it. But it's just, as I said, architecture is such an incredible, powerful tool. And I think it gets overlooked. I think it really does get overlooked. When you walk out of this building here, and you're walking around, how tidy a place is, how a space feels. Does it feel dominating? Does it feel open? Does it feel impressive? Architecture is something that's all around us. Design spaces everywhere. And you want to feel like everyone should be experiencing it and enjoying it. Unfortunately, people just aren't.
And I was reading the book, I don't know if you read it, Humanize. Have you read that book yet?
No, I haven't.
So I was reading the book, Humanize, and it was talking about how now our architecture is kind of like boring architecture. In a way of that he was basically explaining that how when he was younger or walking in certain areas, there's certain architecture that will capture your attention, that you want to stay and stare at it, kind of thing. You want to see there's some buildings.
Subjective, right?
Well, I guess it's subjective because when you look at some buildings are actually designed decoratively. So you would look. I remember being in New York. And I remember walking past a building and the ground floor, it had like all these like little ornament designs. But when you got to the middle, there was no design. But as you got higher, where you will have like apartment blocks and other buildings that will be staring at it, then you will see more designs all the way at the top, kind of thing.
And that's interesting because, sorry to interrupt, but that's interesting because generally, as an architect,
can you put some more oil?
My service is for those that can afford to pay for it.
Okay.
So those beautifully designed apartment blocks are there because the people can afford to purchase the houses. So, you know, it's also interesting to consider it in that respect as well, right? Which is why I think it's this built environment is important for the inclusivity is very important for everybody, rather than those that can afford our services, which is contradictory, right? Because it's what I did as a living, it's how I make my money, it's how I pay for my bills. But it's just interesting to see it in that respect.
So would you say that, like you were saying, that beauty in architecture is kind of subjective to the person, kind of thing? And could you probably maybe beauty can be more focused on the type of materials used or in the way the materials are used to make something beautiful. So one thing I remember at university, I really studied on, sugarcane. So the sugarcane factory in Docklands.
Yes.
And I remember making like materials and stuff out of the sugarcane fibre. And I think there's a possibility of us also using the materials that are even around us to kind of inspire. Because you spoke earlier about
biophilic design, right? So bringing outside in. But then, so when we talk about materiality of a design, it's a whole different conversation in itself, right? So then we move on to the levels of sustainability and reusable materials and lifespans and that kind of thing. But when you talk about materiality, textures, reflections, colours, all of that changes our perspective of a space. Whether that be blue on this wall or whether that be trees there. And we often use in our residential schemes trees for controlling solar gain in buildings. So where do we position these particular trees, and how does that natural environment help control the internal space? It's a whole host of exciting conversation that I find very interesting, which is one of the reasons why I do what I do and why I love what I do. So
do you one thing I wanted to ask, and also those who are in the comments, what inspires you in terms of like if there's a building that kind of inspires you, or like you kind of said, like the kind of like biophilic kind of design and the homelessness and maybe basically like solving issues, but what's the one main thing that inspires you? Or if you can think of a building that kind of inspires you the most every time you think about it to kind of like design spaces, apart from your own designs, obviously.
Of course, but design. I don't have a particular building. There's many great buildings that I enjoy navigating. For me, I focus a lot of my stuff on accessibility. And finding a design, whether that be a house extension or renovation or new build dwelling, on the residential side of things, that becomes adaptive. Which stems from my sister. So surfaces, textures on work surfaces, safety, handles, weights of doors, are they too heavy as you get elderly, stairs, all that kind of thing. Grab rails, all that kind of stuff. How can that be designed and incorporated nicely?
So
the really finer details. It's the problem solving of those solutions that I find really exciting. And a lot of our talks are sort of focused on the sustainability side of things as well, which is a really interesting topic. So I don't have one key thing, but it's more about the problem solving, the adaptability, the sustainable side of things, making houses have longevity. And it's the same with our environments, multi-uses, green spaces. Who can use that? Who
can't use it?
Who can? Who wants to? Who's going to benefit from all that kind of thing? I just find really exciting.
Even the local people being able to benefit from it as well, because like obviously this is not in London, but in some countries where they're not able to have access to their beaches, and like the local people not being able to have access to their beaches and all that kind of stuff. I think that is what helps kind of foster community, and designing things specifically for a certain type of community, because everywhere you go in London, you have different ranges. Oh, just finished?
I've just took it off just a bit. I didn't want it to burn while we was having a conversation, because I think that's cooking quicker than that at the moment.
Okay, so if, for example, in certain areas of London, you will have, you might have an Asian community, or you might have a Afro-Caribbean kind of community. So what the culture that they've kind of grown up with, I think when people design spaces, even like urban spaces, it's designing kind of in a way that suits their culture to kind of meet the needs of the people that actually dwell there. I think sometimes what happens, which is also very beautiful and very nice, is that when cultures kind of dwell in one space, they kind of like plot into space, but they also make it their own kind of thing. And I think that's one thing we need to think about is our urban spaces and how we design it to foster community. Because since COVID, a lot of people came out with mental issues, and you also hear about like maybe elder people being a lot more lonely and not being able to speak to people. So it's designing our urban spaces that kind of, foster people speaking to people, because I'm really big on community. And as you get older, you're going to need people around you. You might not have your family and friends or who live close by or that kind of stuff. And you always hear stories when people say when they're back home, or there might be like a big tree or a big table where everybody comes and sits and gather. I think that's something that in London, we need to foster a lot more, because we're very much always on the go, kind of like, and we kind of forget the in-between spaces of dwelling kind of thing.
Yeah, so whilst we're having this chat, I'm just going to chop up some basil badly.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting topic that you've touched on, but it kind of goes back to this inclusivity and this integration. And I think what could be more exciting is these communities, if they were to blur, rather than be like that, mean blur? As in their boundaries were to mix, and everyone can experience each other's, whether it be cuisine or sort of games of playing, if it's children, if that's kind of thing, this kind of inclusive role, right? Why does it have to be this community lives here and they make that their area, this community lives over here? And it's the same with the homeless individuals. It becomes a space of, again, who do we want here and who do we not want here? You're not welcome here because you're not part of our community. Well, actually, there's a really inclusive
scenario. Well, you think about it, now
right?
You're saying that, is that with homeless community, there probably is communities within communities, no?
Yeah.
So like people who have different cultures and they might experience things differently. I also think it's important to have those spaces for healing spaces, because one thing that I learned recently is that how sometimes you can walk up past buildings, but it can frustrate you. And those who are more, less fortunate, but more on the lower income, they tend to live in spaces where they are looking onto urban streets or they're looking onto urban areas, and they don't have access to green areas, which I think everyone should have access to green spaces. Developers,
when they're designing their several hundreds of houses in one community, there'll be a certain percentage that has to go to social housing. Often, that group of social housing will be placed in the furthest corner, so that those buying the expensive houses don't have to drive through the community that social housing section. You'll often find that play parks, when noise is generated, are tucked away from the more expensive homes. So there's a strategic designing to all of this area. Then what you're creating, yes, these do look nice. Yes, they are more appealing. But you're still creating, I don't want to use the word slums, but you're still creating communities within bigger communities. So I think that's a really interesting topic as well, and it kind of shows how actually we're still designing who do we want here and who do we want not here.
That's not really blurring, like you're saying, like blurring the lines between the two, because then that's kind of sad a little bit, because then you're looking at someone who lives in a social housing as less, like you're saying, not as desirable. We don't want you in our space because you don't make the same amount of money back. And that just compounds
until you've got those that are completely homeless.
But that's not a good thing.
But it's just this mindset that people are in, right? So instantly you think social housing, you think, I'm going to have issues. It's going to be run down. It's not going to be well maintained. Hence, so they put them over there. And it will also be the cheapest, which I understand for terms of developers looking for profit, but it'll be the cheapest, smaller houses So the space standards will be the minimum.
Yeah.
So the environment that you're creating is lesser for them as well.
Yeah, and you have like a 4-bedroom apartment, and it has like the hallway is just literally a turn space.
It will be the minimum spaces. So building regulations provide minimum, and developers will make sure that the minimum. So that'd be garden spaces if required. There'll be. It's very interesting when you look at it like that. Again, who do we want here? Who do we not want here? And that extends from all levels of design, which I think is right. It's very important that we push an agenda to design inclusivity into our schemes.
I definitely agree. And just before we have another conversation, we're going to go on the break real quick. So please stay tuned and we'll be back to you. Okay, this because this isn't stock again. If you have made it this far through the episode, I would like to say a huge thank you for staying tuned. Before we get back into the episode, please take a moment to subscribe to Bold Platform channel, like, comment and reshare. It's our mission to impact and change the narrative of how we use, see and interact with architecture. Also, I would like to say a massive thank you to Royal Institute of British Architecture for sponsoring this year's series of Cooking with an Architect. RIBA London aims to bring awareness to the work of architects through providing support and education opportunities for architects across the UK. So if you're an architect and would like to find out more about what they do and would like to join one of the RIBA London groups, links will be placed in the description box below. And as this year we are focusing on the theme of homelessness, we would like to bring awareness to one of our collaborators this year called Under One Sky, which is a volunteer-led charity that aims to use education, compassion and collaboration to end homelessness in the UK and beyond. They empower individuals, companies and public organisations to be a part of the change, transforming lives and growing a utopian community together. To learn more about Under One Sky, links will be placed in the description box below. So now stay tuned as we go back into the episode. Hey guys, welcome back. We're just about to take out the tomatoes out of the oven and then start to make the soup. So go ahead.
So next step is to blend all this together with our additional ingredients. I don't know if you've got any more questions that you want to...
Oh, do you want another glove? Or
to dry up? No, we're okay.
First of all, wait, let me just put this in here because this requires concentration so we don't burn ourselves. So,
well, if you do that, I can spoon this one in.
Oh, is there another spoon? Yes,
there's a ladle there. I'll protect you.
Oh, this is dangerous.
This is the fun part, right?
Yes, definitely. So earlier we were talking about social youth. We kind of touched a little bit on the topic of social housing. Mm-hmm. I kind of want to know your stand on what do you think about social housing? How can we improve our social housing? Because a lot of our social houses are kind of made out of concrete. They're not kind of maintained.
I mean, this is a very interesting subject actually, and it's something that's quite relevant to all levels of projects. And I actually had quite a heated debate with a planning officer recently. So space standards are set out to minimum requirements.
Yeah.
And you will find that developers design to these minimal requirements to maximise profit.
Yeah.
Now, we recently had a project in which we provided above the minimum standards for the spaces.
Yeah.
And we was refused.
Oh, wow.
And we was refused on the basis that the officer took the assumption that at some point in the future you could use that space for a double bedroom rather than a single bedroom, when the intention was not that. The intention was to actually create a single bedroom flat with a more generous environment for someone to enjoy and live in rather than the minimum standards. And was actually refused on the officer's interpretation of that.
Yeah.
So I think what's really interesting is that
was that really the reason? Or
yeah, so and it come down to the bedroom that we provided, although we didn't meet, so there's an overall, I don't want to bore the viewers too much, but there's an overall minimum size requirement for a particular size flat, 1 bedroom, 1 person, etc. And we was at the maximum, or the minimum size for that, and the bedroom size was larger than the minimum requirements for that. So what they argued was actually you could have 2 people living in this particular flat, which then meant the overall space wasn't large enough, if that makes sense. But that wasn't the intention. Before we blitz any of this up, we want to add some of our additional fancy ingredients. So what I'm trying to say here is that we are governed by minimum standards, and I think minimum standards should not be what drive designs. I think it should be the quality of the space that we create, and that's where we come on to external spaces, inclusive spaces. So we'll just put some sun-dried tomatoes in there as well.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
So yeah, minimum space is something that's a real personal bugbear to me. A bit of sugar as well.
All the sugar?
No, let's not go all the sugar.
Okay.
Let's go 2 nice, big, generous pinches.
Okay.
So yeah, back to minimum space. I just think there is the minimum space requirements. I understand the reasoning for it because it's there to ensure that we don't go beneath that. Yeah. But actually, if we're looking to improve the quality of the living for those in our environments, then I think we need to look at these not being what restrict us. This is very hot, this thing, isn't it?
So you have to, maybe you can use this to press it. Okay, you got it.
There we go, that's fine.
So I'm just going to blitz it quickly.
If you could just blitz that up for me, yeah.
Do you want it very smooth?
Yeah, just go smooth.
That there.
That will do.
Is that okay?
Perfect.
Oh, that was scary. Okay. And here you go.
I mean, it's looking like the desired dish, right? It's starting to look very...
Yeah, it's starting to look very good.
Tomato soupy, right?
Yeah. And it smells really good as well. Okay, so just put this in.
Yeah,
throw that in. Should we wait to get hot or...?
No, put that in and I can put the cream in and we can just sort of start to simmer while we continue our conversation.
Amazing. Yeah, so you said the minimum requirements, but why does everything have to be the minimum requirement?
I just found it a very interesting point that we was trying to go above that, and we was met with restriction. Yeah. Which to me, it kind of it's a contradiction to what I think we should be doing. But so, it comes back to this: who do we want and who do we not want around here? That is very hot still.
What is?
Just splash me.
Oh, sorry.
Be careful when you do that, when you reach over, because that will get you and that is hot.
Oh, the lid's right there as well.
Let's get a bit of this cream in there for us as well.
Okay. It smells really good. I'm excited.
I just think it's such a great dish to relate back to our topic of homelessness and this sort of readily available kind of ingredients and that kind of thing, and simplicity, and we're kind of drawing it back to the values of what people want in design and space and their requirements. Yeah, I just think that's really important.
And I wanted to ask you before we start cutting the sourdough bread, if you could give some advice to architects who want to start maybe designing projects for vulnerable communities, those who sleep rough, or just for communities in general, what kind of advice would you give? I
think you've got to do some groundwork. I'm not saying that you should be sleeping rough, but you should be interacting with the communities that you're looking to design for. Otherwise, you're going to be looking at through rose-tinted glasses, and you're not going to understand the fundamentals of what is required. So when I was doing my concepts, I was actually speaking to homeless individuals, having coffees with them, sitting down on food banks and things like that, and having a chat and saying, what do you feel? And so I had conversations that you would not believe of homeless women being urinated on of an evening and being robbed and all this kind of thing, humiliated, and I just find that bizarre. And that's kind of where the initial concept stemmed from, to provide privacy and security. And none of them said, oh yeah, we want to stay at the Hilton. They just said, we want somewhere to be out of the public gaze. We want somewhere to feel secure. We want somewhere just to gather our thoughts. And I found that really interesting in what they want and what people might think that they want. It's two different things completely. So if you're looking to get into this kind of arm of design, then I would certainly say interact with those you're looking to design for. It's no different to designing an extension for a client. You need to understand what their needs and their requirements are and what they're looking to achieve out of that space. And then you can start to go on to making it realistic, so building regulations, planning, and all those kind of things, the boring stuff, so to speak. But yeah, understand who you're designing for is key to any kind of social schemes.
And in terms of the funding as well, because you said that when you first designed, you weren't looking at the funding, but if someone wanted to go into schemes where they just wanted to start very small, where are some of the places they could go to maybe look at funding or finding ways to make these smaller, like, temporary homes accessible for them?
I would speak to local councils. So there will be departments on local authorities that, you know, have budgets for this kind of scope. And it might not be that you're designing shelters. It might just be that you're doing something for the community that helps. I would also maybe crowdfunding. Crowdfunding your own fees and costs and things like that, because I think sourdough bread. You can cut that. I'm going to put a little bit of this red wine vinegar into this space. There's many of options. There's charities. There's homeless organisations that will possibly have funding. Yeah, funding is a very tricky one because
it's also a big issue, right, for anything.
Yeah, because I mean, for funding wise for our projects, I had councils on board for the concepts that we were looking at. Not for in terms of viability, but certainly to get us on board with designing something viable, and there were certainly budgets there. But it just becomes a very tricky one in terms of, you know, who's paying for what, you know, what land. There's so many social issues with this and political issues. You've got land, ownership, maintenance. And as I've always said from the offset, these concepts are not there to provide solutions. They're there to get the topic of conversation flowing and moving and current. You know, and if you do look at the micro homes and the shelters, then you're looking at potential opportunities as stepping stones rather than for reintegration. Rather than solutions, if that makes sense.
And you know, there's always this big topic between developers, like planners, and also architects. How would you basically say to distinguish the role between a planner and architect, and for people to understand what architects really do? Because, you know, sometimes people might come and ask for drawings, but they might not understand that, oh, I can just get this person to draw it. Why do I need to get an architect to do this kind of design? And I think there's more...
So you sound like a general A client there now. So as you were probably told, you don't have to be an architect to do planning submissions and designs and things like that. But with that comes a whole host of experience and accreditations. It's not just a case of, you know, Reba architects can charge more. It comes with their experience and their background. You know, they've studied at university for X amount of years to unlock that creative potential. They've worked in practices to learn that on-site experience and that actual grounding experience, which I think is very important. I think experience goes a long way. So anyone can do these kind of designs, and this, you know, I feel like it maybe goes a little bit off topic with regards to our homelessness, but
I think it's important because people will say, like, you know, anyone who can maybe do like a homeless project, but there's more to it. There's more, you have to think about the feeling of how people in the space, how they're going to experience it, what impact is going to be around, like when you were designing it, you're also thinking about the impact of those who are passing by the projects that you're designing. So there's more than just you say, oh, I'm just going to design a project that has about 50 homes inside of it, but it's also what is surrounding. Oh, sorry, be careful.
I keep burning myself today.
Yes, okay. It's also about what is surrounding, you know, the environment too, and the people around the environment.
You're creating a community. Or my intention was always to create communities with this scenario, to make them feel like they were part of something. So rather than making them feel neglected or not welcome. So it's about creating a community. It's about creating something that they could feel proud of and have ownership of potentially. You know, we spoke earlier about it being used as a reward if they had set targets, and you know, it was just this environment of inclusivity and this whole design, inclusive design. I think was kind of my whole drivers behind these concepts and these projects. So it's not just about putting a homeless individual in a house, in a caravan, in a micro home, in whatever you want to elaborate that to. And homelessness doesn't just affect individuals. It affects young families that haven't been able to pay bills. It affects war veterans. It could be mental health, mental illness. It could be physical illness. It could be stresses of bills. It could be loss of job. It could be a whole host of things that could catalyst this issue that you find yourself without a home. So having these options readily available to you, I think, is important.
Yeah, and a little bit about in terms of, we're talking about those who are already homeless, but also like systems or projects that can be developed to prevent homelessness. Because in the break, we were talking about how, right now we're in a housing crisis and how a lot of people might find it difficult to pay for rent and even stuff like buying food. Don't you think there's systems that need to be put in place to kind of prevent people going homeless, or also prevent maybe something that is cheaper to build but also still beautiful, but they still can have ownership, like they can actually own the property that they live on? Maybe something that allows them to plant for food and all that kind of stuff. Like, for example, we're talking about community quite a lot. Maybe something where there's a community garden that people can actually plant tomatoes, or they can plant basil, carrots, and all that kind of stuff.
And I think
to kind of help.
I think that's the architect's role, right? To create this community that is self-sufficient, create buildings that are energy efficient and sustainable, so they are low cost and low maintenance themselves. So that might be the materials that they select. It might be the construction type. It might be the insulation U values. So if we can go above and beyond what's minimum requirements to meet building regs, perhaps we would create a homeless shelter or a building that is free to run, that is really low cost maintenance, that creates a community where they do have infrastructure to grow some of their own food. Ultimately, doesn't everybody want that? We all want to lower our cost of living. It is a crisis at the moment, and so you only want a few bills away from becoming homeless. So us as architects, maybe we should be looking at creating more efficient buildings with that in mind, to keep things easy to maintain and low to run.
And even the fact that we have a lot of buildings that's being knocked down every single year, couldn't those buildings which are being knocked down be maintained to the point where, or kind of like refurbished to become homes? Because if we're knocking down things that were just built not too long ago, it's not even one person's lifespan.
It varies from project to project for something like that. So you could be looking at the cost of repairing and maintaining an old building that's leaking, that's not energy efficient. It could be the retrospective work required is too much. It could be the location of that building. It's not just as easy as going, stop knocking buildings down and just retrofit them. Obviously that's a sustainable solution initially, but actually when you look into it greater, there's bigger issues with that. And it comes back to this whole issue. It's not as easy just to put a homeless individual into a shelter. That some of them do not want to be housed again. From my experience when speaking to them, some of them, the moment they get put into a house, they think that bill's going to come through the door. They like that freedom. They like that ability to move and travel from place to place. So it's a serious. Do you want some oil in this? It's a serious issue, which is totally layered.
Which I think is very sad, though, for those who need help and they're not able to get any help. And
it's like having the right infrastructure.
It's like you said, we only can do so much as like designers or architects to kind of create spaces for those who needs that extra help.
Inclusive architecture. I just think that's a huge drive that we should be looking at. Creating spaces, or everyone should have the ability to experience beautifully designed space. And that's kind of one of my main drivers of all my projects, whether that be a small extension or whether that be something community driven or whether that be a development. There should be an element of accessibility and inclusivity to all of that.
Okay, and what else do you need us to do now?
So now it's just a bit of frying this sour bread.
Frying,
toasting.
Yeah.
And then you can do the honours of getting the first tasting, and I can watch by your reaction to see if it's been successful or not, and then go from there.
Not off camera, but on camera?
On camera.
Okay.
Absolutely, and you're going to have to put on a brave face and lie and tell everyone it's lovely.
Okay, well I guess I'll have to do that. I'm joking, it's going to be good, guys. It smells so delicious in here. If you can actually smell, if you cook it, you can smell it, but and taste it. But yeah, but it's really good. Thank you as well for coming on the show today, because I know you have a busy schedule and coming on. So I'm very excited for this dish and also the conversation. I'm really excited to see what everyone else is going to think about the conversation that we had today. And hopefully as well, in the comments, also have your own little dialogue and conversations and what you think about homelessness and how we can design better space for those who are homeless. So right now we are toasting the rest.
Correct.
We finished the tomato. And yeah, so anything else you want to add? Any comments? Or?
No, I don't think there's anything to add, but what I think is really important is what we've done today is just making the topic relevant again and keeping that conversation moving. And if one person can change their mindset towards a homeless individual, doesn't necessarily mean go out and give them some money or give them food, but just maybe acknowledge them with a smile. I think that alone means this whole series has been successful.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm trying to achieve with my skill set in architecture, is just to change the mindset of individuals, really.
Yeah, and change the way people see as well. Like this with the bold, we're basically trying to make people change the way how they see architecture. So kind of changing the narrative a little bit and how people see and how they can interact. And if you're someone who's not an architect or like in any sense a sort of designer, there are ways for you to also get involved. There's also, like I mentioned before, the Under One Sky charity. So if you would want to get involved and try to help somehow, the links are in the description. So do press them, and then you can also help in the little ways that you can help, if possible. Yeah, so we're just gonna wrap up quickly, and then we're going to come back with a final dish. Hi guys, so we just finished dishing up the tomato soup. I am so excited to taste it. Any last words?
Enjoy. Bon appetit, right?
So I'm gonna try it now. Guys, I think it's gonna taste so good.
Honest verdict, please.
It smells really good. I actually really like it.
Good. That was a very apprehensive, wasn't it? No, as long as you like it.
Honestly, I actually really like it. It tastes really good. Okay guys, thank you so much for tuning in so far, and also thank you to our guest James for being on the show
Thanks
today and cooking this delicious dish. Remember to subscribe, like, comment and reshare, and also a big thank you again to Reba, who supported us for this year's series. So thank you guys, and I can't wait to see you for the next episode. Bye. It's the way bye.
Can we cut that bit? So from today's episode, I've learned that I can cook a great tomato soup, which is really important. But what's actually been really nice is it's brought back my passion for this topic of homelessness and inclusive architecture, because you can find yourself drawn into your everyday mundane designs of extensions and refurbishment. So it's been really nice to rekindle that light for myself, you know, and take it back to what actually got me onto this topic. So my sister's conditions. It's just a great experience. Very rarely do you get this opportunity to come outside of the office and do something that's so ad hoc and off the cuff. So yeah, it's been really, really enjoyable in that respect.
Just a little bit what I learned from today's episode. I learned so much in terms of the homeless people and what we can do as architects more to kind of design not only architecture but systems that really help people transition out of a lifestyle which they were once rough sleepers into a lifestyle where they could be housed. And also learning that not everybody wants to be imposed or wants an actual physical space to actually live in, and that we need to really foster more about community in our spaces and kind of design spaces that help people to communicate and engage more. So today's episode was really amazing. I tried the tomato soup, it was really good, it was really nice, and I just can't wait to see what the rest of the episodes has to offer.